Alrighty. Hi, welcome to my speech, or my final presentation is what you called it. I decided to do mine on autism. This is a slideshow I found online, but I've also thrown in a couple facts from my own research, which I've done quite a bit, but I've known quite a bit about autism from my past with working with students in my high school with autism. I had a specific student that I worked with. He was low functioning and he could not talk. He would verbalize, of course, but he could not talk, and he could walk, but his mobility was kind of limited by the way he stood, which was one hip out to the side and one knee bent, and his thumb in his mouth and his hand on his head. And so that would keep him from really wanting to walk too much. But he could, and he could run, and he could jump, and he would skip in the hallways if he got really excited. But that just gives you an idea of what severe autism looks like. He could still walk and all that and do everything that we could do mobility-wise, even run, which was very crazy to me when he started running around us. But my major is in moderate to severe disabilities, which is just special education, but with those that have a more severe disability, which would be autism or Down syndrome, or something that would keep them from having what most people call a normal life. But going on to this, I'm not going to talk about every slide that's on here because a lot of them just fill up too much time. So autism, there are 5 different types of autism. And there are Canners, PDD, NOS, CDD, Asperger's, and Rett's. Sorry, there are 5. Rett's. And so that's out of order of what I'm going to go over them as, but to give you a general idea, they're all going to be considered autism, but Canners is the main one that people will refer to when they talk about autism. And going into that, it's a neurological disorder. This is not from anything that you would like to blame it on. It's not from the way that you are raised. It's not from your race, your color, your gender. Well, some of it does depend upon your gender, because most autism, besides Rett syndrome, is found in males more than females. But Rett syndrome specifically is found a lot more in females. But no matter your lifestyle, your income, your religion, it doesn't matter. It's all just going to be neurological based. While there are some things that you can assist it with by in pregnancy, doing drugs, smoking, drinking, all of that stuff can cause it because it can mess with the child's brain while it's developing. But besides that, you can't really decide or pick and choose your lifestyle to decide whether or not your kid's going to have autism. And most of the time, autism will just affect their social skills and their communication skills, and sometimes mobility because of their lack of development. And it'll cause sometimes self-injurious behavior or aggressive behavior. But once again, it's the mind of a small child is often in a bigger body. Autism can be seen. There are a lot of symptoms. But sensory overload will lead to repeated body movements, which is this, or scratching, or like touching a certain part of their body over and over again. Responses to people will always be a little weird. So if you go up to someone with autism and say, "Hey, my grandma just died," they're not going to know what to say because they've not been taught those social cues, and their brain doesn't comprehend those social cues. They won't feel the empathy that most people would in that situation. They won't like to have anything in their schedule changed at all. So they will live by a strict schedule most of the time. They will understand that schedule if they are more high functioning. And if something happens to that schedule, it will throw them off quite a bit, and it will cause a lot of distress for them. They will have attachment to objects. That could be an actual object. That could be learning something about an object. It's just whatever they decide to attach to. It's just partially autism fills into an attachment disorder, a change disorder, and many other things that you wouldn't necessarily assume it's part of it, but most mental disorders are all connected. And once again, sensory sensitivities, which is going to be the repeated body movements, but touch, feel, smell, taste, see, all of that's going to be, and hear is all going to be part of a sensory overload to them, or underload for that matter. So going into the types, we're going to start with just autistic disorder, which is also known as Canners. I don't really remember if they refer to Canners in this slideshow, but I know it's your generalized type of autism that everybody knows about. Everybody's going to stereotype into it to think like, oh, they don't know how to speak, they don't understand, they can't do math, all that stuff. So it is that on a severe level, but if they're more high functioning, they won't have as many issues with that. But again, it'll always be very hard to communicate with those with autism. So Asperger's disorder, this is one of the more high functioning disorders of autism. Once again, autism is a broad spectrum, so it's going to be harder for them to understand how to communicate properly. Conversations may be awkward for the other person. They won't have a delay in their language. Like, they'll understand how to speak the entire time. It's just taking social cues for them, and they will think the exact same way we do, or above us for that matter. It's genuinely just their communication that's going to be a problem and how they interact with other people. Pervasive developmental disorder, or not otherwise specified, or PDD-NOS, which is what I talked about earlier. It's atypical autism, and so it means, like, if your child may show slight symptoms of certain types of autism, not all of them, but some of the parts of them, then you can't really specify which type of autism they have, so it gets a little harder to diagnose. This is just so you have an overall diagnosis for the child. That's why many people, and the slideshow included, will say that this is the umbrella term. But autism is the umbrella term. If they have PDD-NOS, that is completely and utterly just them having autism, but an undescribable and not properly diagnosable autism. There's Rett's disorder, which I mentioned earlier, which is going to be more of found in females, while other forms of autism are going to be able to be found within males. Females are going to have Rett's disorder. There are some males that do have it, but it is definitely more in females. And they have a normal development, and then they lose. Just as most types of autism will, they will develop for a few years, and then suddenly all of their like thoughts and social skills will just kind of drop, because that's just how autism works. And so with this one, they'll start dropping from age 1 to 4. But most types of autism, you will be able to see it within like 3 years. That's when it's most of the time diagnosable. Childhood disintegrated disorder, which is CDD, which it's normal development for 2 years. And then it just drops. Now, all of the other types of autism, you'll often be able to see them within their social cues, or you'll see that their development is not as strong as other students. But with CDD, they will develop all the way like perfectly for 2 years, and then it will immediately drop, and you won't know that it was autism until you get a diagnosis, which can be sometimes startling for parents who aren't used to that. So autism is always going to be a spectrum disorder, and this is going to go into a bunch of things that I'll go into the diagnosis for a second. Diagnosis is definitely, they say it's not a definite medical test, and it's not. It's going to be interviews and questions. It's not going to be a test, it's going to be questions. So the parent that is trying to get the child diagnosed, they're going to be asked many questions about their daily habits and the things they do. Their behavior is going to be observed, and psychologists, neurologists, pediatricians, speech and language therapists, learning consultants, everything. Everybody's going to be brought in, because specifically going into it, neurologist, this is a neurological disorder. Psychologist, looking into their thought process as to why they do certain things. Developmental pediatrician, looking into their development to see if they're not developing properly. Speech and language therapist, to make sure that they don't have just a speech impediment rather than autism. And learning consultant is to make sure that they can't learn the proper speed, rather than they're just not doing well in class. Because oftentimes people can confuse autism with other things that are just small setbacks, such as speech impediments or ADHD or anything of that sort, which technically ADHD is on the lower level, and the higher level of ADHD is on the lowest level of autism scale. But besides that, going into it, I told you about all of these. These are all the symptoms of autism that you will see. Okay, like, you won't see them all at once in one person, but they will all be seen if you look at an array of people with autism. So, once again, communication skills, they won't know how to communicate properly. Delayed language, they sometimes learn how to speak a little later. I don't know what that is. I didn't go off of this. I went off of my own research. Social interactions, it'll always be weird. As I said, you tell them that your grandma died. Some of them won't know how to react to that. Most of them won't, actually, including those with Asperger's, which is a high-functioning sort of autism. Behaviors that would be repetitive and impeding. So it's, again, self-injurious. It's like when they get overstimulated, scratching, pulling, They'll hit other people. I've known some to take their clothes off when they get overstimulated and just yell. Many that'll cuss, hit, all that stuff. That's sensory movement disorder. So if they see movement, they don't like it, it'll cause issues. Touching, hearing is a big thing because if they hear too many things going on, it hurts. It throws them off quite a bit. Everything has to be in a routine because if it's not in a routine, it's not correct, which can be sometimes taken as OCD. That's why all the tests are done. Because once again, every mental disorder is woven into the other. So it's really hard to differentiate because it's all in the mental, and the brain is very connected to itself in many ways. They're talking about interventions, which all you gotta do, love your kid, give them meds if the doctor thinks that it's wise. Don't push for meds, just give them meds if they need it. Put them into situations where they can learn, because oftentimes with autism, they won't be able to go out on their own. So try your best to give them that freedom that they would have if they were able to live what society calls a normal life. But don't push it, and make sure that you understand that they have limitations just like everybody else. Theirs are just a little more. But all I wanted to do here was to tell you guys about autism, tell you the different types, and explain to you how it's a little different than what you expected and what you've been taught. The stereotypes aren't always right. And I hope I got my point across. And if you have any questions, you can always ask them. I'm willing to answer them. I'm no expert, but the internet's always out there. So honestly, if you really care about this, you should look into it, because autism is a big part of our community. Like our entire planet, there are people with autism. You're always going to run into people with it, and you may not even know it. So it's just good to know for future reference. But thank you for listening.